I would love to know, actually, if we did a survey of everyone who works in this industry, how people found themselves in a role which is CRO related. If we know that there's a lot of traffic that is arriving on the homepage or a specific landing page, then that should be a priority, because that has the highest opportunity for us to find and fix problems. And if we fix and improve an experience on those pages, then the benefits will be multiplied because of how many people are landing there. There's so much chat about AI at the moment, about how it can help, and obviously it can help enormously. But in my view, the areas which still require a human touch, so strategic, anything which requires, let's say, a face-to-face interface, leaving that to an AI, it might not be able to do that so much. Experimentation programs can be really good, but if they happen in isolation and if they happen in a small team which are doing great things, but they are not sharing those results and they're not sharing the value of what they're doing with the rest of the business, then it is not going to work. It's going to fail, because it will happen in isolation and it won't spread. The customers suffer because of the way that businesses organize themselves, and that is a problem which is essentially a business problem which needs fixing from the inside. The most common blind spots, let's say, are thinking that they will get overnight results. Getting from doing nothing to doing something takes quite a lot of effort, and it takes quite a lot of time, quite a lot of patience, and also investment, right? You need to put your money where your mouth is if you're willing and you want to start an experimentation program and get started with CRO.
Welcome to another episode of the CRO Hour series by VWO Podcast. Get ready for some fun, insightful conversations about experimentation, user research, and the huge impact that CRO can have in your business. Before we speak to our guest, here's a very quick overview of who we are and what we do. VWO is a leading experience optimization platform that you can use to manage your experimentation program and deliver personalized experiences. One of our most popular offerings is VWO Insights, a platform to analyze user journeys and identify conversion roadblocks. Take a free trial with VWO today and optimize experiences across all your digital platforms. Now, let's jump right into this conversation. Today, we're thrilled to have Joe Johnston, Head of Conversion at Launch, joining us. With 10 years of experience in digital marketing, Joe has a true passion for helping people and businesses realize their growth potential. His expertise spans from digital communications to digital strategy, UX, and CRO. Joe also shares his knowledge as a guest lecturer at UWE and the University of Bristol. We're excited to dive into his valuable insights and strategies for driving conversion success. Hi, Joe. Welcome to the CRO Hour by VWO Podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I'm excited to get stuck into our conversation.
Thank you so much for accepting the invite. I am really looking forward to this conversation. I'm sure not just me, the entire listeners and the viewers are going to have a great time listening to you and will definitely gather a lot of insights. So really look forward to this conversation. Before I dive into, the technicalities of CRO, I'd love to know a bit more about, how's your week been so far? How's 2024 been so far for you?
Yeah, it's been a good week, actually. Thank you. Yeah. So what have I been up to? So last Saturday on the weekend, me and two of my colleagues, we cycled from our head office in Bristol to our head office in Exeter, which is 100 miles. So it took us in total 10 hours to get there on our bikes. But we were doing it to raise money for a charity in Exeter, which helps cancer patients. So yeah, it was a really good cause. And despite the horrible British weather, we managed to get there in good time, and so that was really good fun. So I've just been in recovery mostly from that, trying to nurse my body back to health. And 2024 as a year, it's been good to us, and it's been good to me as a person. We've done lots of interesting things in our team, which I'm hoping to talk a little bit about today on the podcast. And we're just quite excited, really, to be honest. It's been a really fun and interesting year for us as a company. We've grown. We've gone from being about 27, 28 people last year to about 34, 35 people. So we've, for a company which is relatively small, It feels like we've taken on a few new people. In fact, 2 new people started in our Bristol office just yesterday. So it's been really exciting getting to speak to them and to learn about them, and getting them into the swing of things, how we do things at launch. So yeah, it's been pretty good, thanks so far. How about you?
All good for me as well. I mean, nothing to majorly complain about. I'm still looking forward to the next 3.5 months or so. Still a few things to do and achieve and make sure that we're planning ahead for 2025. But yes, so far so good.
Good. Glad to hear
And
it.
you mentioned cycling, right? I believe you're into fitness quite a lot then. Safe to assume?
Yeah, I'd say so. I try and stay active and get out as much as I can. I do. Some part of me does sort of regret the fact that most of my job life is indoors and mostly desk based. I would love to have part of my job to be a bit more outdoorsy and active. I wonder if I'm going to come to regret how much sedentary time I spend at my desk when I get a little bit older. But so I try and make up for that in my spare time by making sure I get out and go running, cycling, and do various different types of things to make sure I'm staying loose and limber.
Great. And tell us about I mean, what is it that you love the most about the CRO industry? I know that you've mentioned a part of it is something that you don't like, which is staying indoors. But what is it that you love the most about it?
Um, I so I wonder. I would love to know actually if we did a survey of everyone who works in this industry, how people found themselves in a role which is CRO related. Because the people I speak to, there's so many different routes into this industry, and it's my route was quite unique, but I imagine no more unique than other people's. I started out in something quite different and ended up doing what I do now. But for me, in terms of what I love, what makes me tick, my passion, my strengths are all related to learning. Absolutely love learning. I love learning environments, places where it's safe to make a mistake, where it's encouraged, in fact, to fail. I love those environments where you can be more creative and think differently, and that kind of behavior is encouraged. That's something that I'm really passionate about, and experimentation in CRO is a world where that is necessary, that you have to be that like that, and that is the only way forward, really. So I feel like it's kind of inevitable that I've ended up in a role where that mentality is the norm, and actually it's something that's celebrated. So but yeah, so for me, that I've only really in retrospect realized that, because it's almost like a post-rationalization when people say, "Oh, how did you end up in CRO? How did you end up there?" I kind of, on reflection, that's how I feel like I've ended up sticking where I am. But yeah, it would be really interesting to find out, and doing a bit of a study in that and trying to understand the common paths to CRO.
Yep, definitely. And very interesting. I think a few months back, I was doing another series for the podcast, and we were talking to the females of the industry. And every story that I heard was very, very different, how they ended up in the industry. So, and not just those people, right? People who I speak to, again, my story or my colleague's story is similar, but so different, which is we started at a completely different note and here we are, and we love what we do. So that's great at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Great.
I kind of feel
Yep.
like there are some sort of unique qualities that most people do have in CRO, and that probably is a passion for learning and being curious generally, and in wanting to know why something works or how it could be better. So the idea of optimizing or finding an optimal solution for something is another trait that I think probably must be common, but also that kind of curiosity to understand people and being a empathetic person that wants to better understand why people are motivated to do what they do, but also how you can improve their lives is probably it's something I definitely feel like I have, and maybe I'm just projecting, but I would assume that that's definitely something that's useful to have as a quality.
Yep. I completely second that. And while you were talking about empathy, right? In general, we've also seen how you talk about various topics, of course, including inclusive design. How do you see businesses ensuring digital accessibility into their website designs? What is it that you do personally at launch, and how does one go about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something, so accessibility, inclusive design is definitely a topic that is gaining in popularity, is gaining in traction, and I hear it being talked about more and more, which is, so first of all, awareness of it as a topic and as a problem that needs solving is definitely the number one way of advancing accessibility for everyone. So the more people who are aware of it as a problem that needs solving, it is definitely the way forward. So that's kind of the first thing, is our job as CRO consultants, and for many of our clients, being an external voice and an opinion on how websites and their websites should be, is to raise awareness and is to make sure that it is on the agenda and that we are pushing for that to be on the agenda, and so that it can't be ignored. So I'd say number one is kind of that, is that our taking our responsibility and our role seriously in promoting inclusive design as a kind of standard that we should be approaching all of our testing and our design and research with. So promoting it as an idea, making sure that businesses are aware of it and that they want it's because it's hard to force someone to be interested in something. They kind of need to want to do it to begin with, or at least they need to be aware of it as a problem to know that they should do it. So it's becoming more frequent now that we'll start a program with a client where they are already asking us to look at this as a problem to fix, but that's still probably not the norm. I'd say it's more us pushing that as the agenda. But what I would say is that in terms of where the responsibility lies or the accountability lies for solving that problem per business, it is shared across the whole company. It's not one individual's problem to solve. It's quite often it's put at the feet of the designer, the UX designer, to make sure that they are kind of making sure that that is something that is being solved. But really, the designers are rarely the ones who are not addressing this. They're usually the ones who are most aware of it as a problem and are probably the ones who are trying to solve it. But in my opinion, it's predominantly a senior stakeholder or boardroom problem where there isn't the awareness at that level, at the higher level, to see it as an issue which needs to be brought forward or pushed. So where I see then the responsibility lying, or where it should be most focused, is probably at the senior level, is that there needs to be a UX champion in the boardroom when they're having discussions about what the program or pipeline is for improvements on the website. Then that at that level it needs to be putting forward as a high priority. But to answer your question, in terms of what we do, practically speaking, a number of things. So when we're designing new tests or we're designing new pages that we want to include on a website, we will have a number of usability checks, but also accessibility checks that we'll go through in order to try and make sure that it passes and as many of the accessibility standards as possible. Now, we can never do everything, and we try and hold ourselves to a high standard, but there are almost sort of too many, or it would be too difficult and costly for us to go through every single check. So I guess for us, it's about trying to hit the maximum number of possible checks in a efficient way, where we also feel like we have resource to do that properly and to do it in a way that's actually useful for the devs that are going to be building those pages. So we'll use a number of tools to check common things like color contrast, like font size, like whether it's readable, these kinds of checks that are fairly standard, to make sure that we're sort of doing our bit to make sure that it's as accessible as possible. But yeah, there are other things that I'll when or if a client is interested, I'll probably go into a bit more detail And I'll also encourage them to read around the issue. We might share guides with them. We might share best practice. We might even recommend books for them to read around the issue if they're really interested. And I'll chew their ears off and bore them to death about it.
Got it. Okay. And you were talking about usability. You were talking about, in general, how it's important for people to go ahead and research, right? And with so many user research methods available, um, especially when we talk about the qualitative analysis tools that are available, be it heat maps, session recordings, surveys, firm analytics, which are the ones that you rely on consistently in your CRO strategy? What is it that you find what is it that is most confident, where you feel most confident?
Yeah, that's a good one. I guess I should probably there's a couple of ways of answering that question. Maybe so the first way I'll answer that is by thinking about which research method I find to be the most valuable. So the one that gives the most value for money, right? So the one that, let's say, will give the highest number of insights per hour spent doing that research. So the highest sort of ideation rate or insight rate that we can get out of that kind of research. And in my experience, the kind of research method I find to give the highest value is usability studies or user testing, where we are speaking to a potential customer or customer, and actually witnessing, watching, observing them go through the process of carrying out whichever action on the website that we find we want to be researching. So that could be virtually using a virtual testing tool, or it could be sometimes even face-to-face, although that's much less common these days. And sometimes it could be synchronous or it could be asynchronous, depends if that session needs to be moderated or not. So for me, those situations are so valuable because there's so much data that you can get from that, not just from where their mouse is moving on the page, how they move through the website, but it's also what they're saying. So you get that narrative of their internal thoughts, but it's also what their face is doing. So there's a lot of expression and emotion that is communicated just through their face and their body language. So there's so much richness to that experience of watching someone and observe and going through the process of whichever action it is, if it's buying something, if it's signing up for something, if it's returning, whichever action. So that it's just such a data rich way of doing research. That said, it's expensive, and it's expensive in terms of resource, time, and sometimes the method, right? So it's not always a viable option. So in terms of passively collecting data, which we can then come back and look at, heat maps and session recordings for me hold a huge amount of value in terms of how much time it takes to review that information, but also how easy it is to collect it because it's all done passively through the tool. And so I would say heat maps and session recordings are an incredibly, we use them so much, and we go pretty much any page or stage in the journey we're looking at, we will review that data to make sure that we're catching any errors, or if there's any improvements to be made. We do use surveys and we do use other methods as well, but mostly in the case of trying to validate a problem we've found, or if we've run out of other ways of finding the answer to that issue, we might use a survey to back that up, or to give a third insight on the same problem, so we can kind of triangulate the issue a bit better.
Yep, yep. Makes sense. And for people who are relatively newer to this industry, right? One thing that I think a lot of the clients that we speak to, and I'm sure this is something that you may have also noticed, is when they look at heat maps and session recordings, it can be really overwhelming sometimes, at least to begin with, right? Do you have any tips and tricks for those set of users? I know that one is define your focus, look at things accordingly. That's of course the first thing to do. But any specific tips that you have for those set of users who are new and are struggling with analyzing session recordings and heat maps?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely. There are, I think, as you mentioned quite rightly, the it's only as useful, the tool is only as useful as your business question going into that tool. So you need to have a focus in mind before you approach it, because otherwise it can be like any other analytics tool. It can be overwhelming in the amount of data that you can find, and you can quite easily get lost. You could spend hours and hours just pouring through session recordings and heat maps, looking to find an insight like a needle in a haystack, but you could be there for a long time because what you're doing is you're not really refining your search. So I'd say looking at the high value journeys, for example, if we know that there's a lot of traffic that is arriving on the homepage or a specific landing page which is getting really high value traffic landing there, then that should be a priority, because that has the highest opportunity for us to find and fix problems. And if we fix and improve an experience on those pages, then the benefits will be multiplied because of how many people are landing there and how many people will benefit from that improvement. So high priority pages are ones where high traffic or high value actions on those pages. And another way is by looking specifically for signals which indicate struggle, so issues on the site. So there are different tools which have different names for these, but sometimes they call it struggle score, or it could be rage clicks, or it could be quickbacks. So there are actually similar terminology, but depends on which tool you're using. But often there are metrics which are in those tools which will give you an idea of where a user might be struggling. So, for example, a rage click would be where someone is rapidly tapping on the same thing, which can sometimes indicate frustration, right? So that is, if you filter all of your session recordings just to pages or recordings which include those kinds of actions, you're immediately refining through the hundreds of thousands of recordings the ones which potentially have a high signal of frustration. So that will immediately narrow down the number of session recordings that you can look at.
Right. Makes sense. And recently, the buzzword, not recently, I would say, but it's been quite some time, the buzzword is AI, right? Everyone's going gaga over it. There is so much going on about AI. And it's also transformed many aspects of CRO, I would say. A lot of the tools in the market, everyone's getting into incorporating AI into the system as much as possible, because of course it is a lot of manual effort and time when we talk about just analysis or in general setting up tests, etc., right? But which areas do you believe will always require a human touch?
I love this question, by the way. I think this is such a great question because this, as you say, there's so much chat about AI at the moment about how it can help, and obviously it can help enormously with many different tasks. But there's probably not enough attention, I don't think, on talking about the areas which are still or are let's say future-proof. That kind of interesting term, future-proof from AI. And it's almost like an impossible question to an extent, because it's so hard for us to predict how far AI will go and how much it will kind of help us in future. But for now, and I guess for the next 12 months at least, I feel like my answer to this question is probably safe. But in my view, the areas which still require a human touch are anything which requires higher level meta-analysis, so strategic joining up all of the different data points, and anything which requires, let's say, a face-to-face interface, but also emotion. So the examples of that will be when you're doing usability testing or interviews which require a lot of hand-holding. So if you're doing, say, prototype testing or a new website and you want feedback, that requires quite a lot of assistance for the participant, where you might need to give them feedback, give them some help. Leaving that to an AI, it might not be able to do that so much. Focus groups would be very strange if the focus group was run by an AI. I think you need to have that human touch, someone to guide the discussion, someone to prompt the discussion, and also to read the room, which is a distinctly human trait, to be able to to get a sense from everyone in the room about where their emotions are lying and how comfortable they are in a situation, and making them feel comfortable, especially around sensitive topics, which can be really delicate. So there's those. There's also reviewing video recordings from interviews. So in a similar way, as I was mentioning earlier, that really rich data we get back on people's body language, but also their facial expressions. Now, there are AI tools now which are claiming that they can get sentiment analysis just from looking at your face and understanding that. But the accuracy of those, I'm not 100% convinced in. Sometimes I'm not sure if they always get the full picture. Facilitating workshops and leading workshops where you have, let's say, several stakeholders, could be 6 or 7 people in a room, again, reading the room, guiding the discussion, balancing the views and opinions, and also balancing the potential difference in egos in the room. Some might be introverts, some might be extroverts. How do you make sure that everyone gets their voice heard equally and they all participate and they all share? And that can be a workshop where it could be an ideation workshop. It could be you're trying to facilitate a strategy session with a few different stakeholders from the business. And also bringing energy to the discussion and bringing energy to the room is a distinctly human quality where only really a human could get that room focused and aligned and also energized to try and solve that problem. And I think that's definitely safe at the moment. And then, the last one, interpretation of the many different data streams, let's say kind of meta-analysis of all the different inputs you have for your insights to come up with a strategy or a roadmap. At the moment, we don't really have AI which can do that kind of higher level problem solving. Very good at doing individual tasks like writing a user testing script, analyzing an email, doing even meta-analysis of existing research papers, but applying that to your specific business, applying it to your specific product, your audience, and how you're set up internally as a business, your priorities. There's hundreds of different factors at play in any given business where you're trying to come up with a cohesive strategy. And as yet, AI cannot solve that problem of combining all of those different data streams and coming up with a strategy. So I think that's very much protected for now.
Very interesting point, especially the second point that you mentioned, right? I think this is not something that's spoken a lot about. The fact that you have to have that human touch while facilitating workshops, right? And so rightly put, the emotions that we can gather and the subjectivity that humans bring in. I don't think that's going to come in very soon, at least. I don't predict that to come in really soon with AI and machine learning, uh, to have that sort of human touch incorporated. So very, very, very well said. Great points. Thank you so much for that. Um, Moving on, how do you integrate an omni-channel approach to ensure a cohesive user experience across different touch points?
Yeah, another great question. These are brilliant questions that really get me thinking about how they kind of they go to the heart of what I think businesses are facing in terms of trying to improve the overall customer experience. So the user experience across different touch points. So what we're talking about is every single interaction that a customer has with a business or a brand across their entire journey. So that's from when they first hear about that brand all the way through to when they either are a loyal customer or they stop being a customer. So that whole life cycle. And how do you integrate an approach which is cohesive, is coherent, has the same feel to it the whole way through, and is also seamless? And that is kind of like the pinnacle of what everyone is trying to get to, and it's really difficult. My take on this is that it's predominantly an organizational issue of collaboration. So the way that businesses are organized into teams and the way that they're incentivized by metrics often means that it is a disjointed customer experience. So customers suffer because of the way that businesses organize themselves. And that is a problem which is essentially a business problem which needs fixing from the inside. So for example, a web team or a performance marketing team, digital marketing team, they are their area of responsibility is around the way the website or the app behaves, and you might have product within there too, and they have metrics and targets to meet that are specific to that point in the journey, but they aren't necessarily incentivized on elements of the journey which are either further upstream or further downstream. So for example, the customer acquisition team, the sales and marketing team, probably aren't incentivized to decrease the returns rate. So for an e-commerce brand that does fashion, they might not be incentivized to decrease the number of product returns there are. They might only be incentivized to increase conversion, sales, average order value. That means that there are implications to the customer journey beyond what happens in the acquisition stage. So you might have people in the acquisition team, sales team, marketing team that are behaving or are incentivized to do things that will actually have a negative effect or negative implications on customers and their happiness further downstream. So you might be, for example, overinflating the value or overinflating the expectations of what this product or service is going to offer the customer in order to get them to convert, because you're being measured on conversion rate and sales. But then, for example, the customer receives that product, it's not what they expected, it's been missold or missold or it's not living up to expectations, and therefore they return that product, or they're not quite happy, they don't give it a great rating. And that disconnect there is fundamentally the problem that I think most businesses are facing. So the answer is around collaboration and also sharing targets, or having targets which actually stretch across that customer journey so that teams are incentivized to collaborate more intensively and actually take note of how the actions that they are taking are affecting the customer experience upstream and downstream from them. That's a very, very long answer, but one practical way of us doing this, and what we are doing more and more at launch, is the kind of research that we'll do won't just be focused on the website. We'll try and make sure that the research that we do, for example, user testing, will take into account the touch points further upstream and downstream. So we won't just ask them for feedback on the service of the website or the app. We'll ask them to review the ads or the SEO listings or whichever touch point they came from before, to make sure that those two things actually line up and that that's a cohesive experience and it works, right? So that there's no different expectations that aren't being met. And that way we're making sure that there is joint responsibility and accountability for the experience that customer is receiving across those different touch points. Yes, I could go on for this for a while, so you'll have to stop me.
No, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with everything that you said. It's so important to set the right expectations. Just talking about the example that you took, right? We do see different teams having different goals, and everyone's and not that it's their fault, right? Everyone's focused around their own incentives, their own targets. So of course they will do everything in their part to ensure that they're able to get to um, close their targets, right? And in the process, the macro goal that is there for the business sometimes is missed upon because everyone's so focused on micro goals. And that's something that we also talk about in CRO processes as well, right? Everyone talks about the macro goals, which is the conversion rate, which is increasing AOV, revenue, transactions. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that that's the macro goal. And until and unless you start fixing the micro goals, the macro goal wouldn't really fix in a day or two, right? So very, very interesting points. And I think everyone really needs to hear this and understand this, and implement it as much as possible,
Yeah.
organization. So interesting, very, very interesting points.
Can I just add one
While we were
more?
talking,
But sorry, can I add one more point whilst we're on it,
yes, please.
really quickly? Which is, and this is something that we're really excited about this year, is that we're talking more as an agency. We're talking more about customer happiness and making sure that that's at the heart of everything we do. And something that we've realized is that is something that is very rarely measured or given as much equal importance to as sales, average order value, and that kind of thing. So we're looking to redress that balance by optimizing towards happiness rather than only optimizing towards revenue or sales. So it's something that we can't talk too much about now, but interestingly, further this later this year, early next year, we're looking to build on that and offer our clients ways to really invest in measuring what matters, and that isn't always the increase in sales. It is actually, in terms of the long-term sustainable growth of the business, it's about actually making sure that your customers are happy, right? So that's something that we're going to be doing more on.
All the very best for that. I hopefully someday we hear about it. What is it that you were trying to do? I'm sure everyone's gonna take inspiration as well. While we were talking about expectation setting, right? And you also did talk about it in the previous answer as well. But when we talk about setting realistic expectations, as an agency, what is it that you ensure that you're talking about, or what kind of challenges do you, firstly, what kind of challenges do you face when talking about CRO as a process with clients or prospects? Because CRO, if we look at it, it's so glamorized because of increasing conversion rate. That's the first thing that everyone gets to know, right? And they come with the expectation that things are going to happen instantly, which is not really the case, right? So what are the kind of challenges that you face, and what is it that you do in order to ensure that you're able to set the right expectations from day one?
Yeah, it's a interesting point around the CRO and how conversion rate optimization by definition is almost doomed to be talking about conversion rate forever. And so this is a discussion that comes up quite often in this industry, is around whether we have the right name for what we do. And I do think that there is something to be said for us trying to move towards experimentation as a term rather than just CRO, because ultimately what we're doing is trying to optimize towards different things. It's not always the same metric. Conversion rate is for many times a perverse incentive. It doesn't always work. So, but yeah, at the same time, it's also the most widely accepted and recognized term for the collection of methodologies that we use. The kind of, it's still useful for that reason. But in terms of setting expectations with clients, and I think it's mostly about making sure that it's partly an education piece, but also making sure that we're aligned on values. So, for example, when we start to enter into a process of either doing a proposal or we're looking to start a contract with a client, we always obviously have to discuss what their objectives are and also the KPIs for how we'll be measured for success. And as a rule, we won't make any hard promises or any commitments to outcomes that are outside of our control. And often that is things like conversion rate or revenue. Those things are very difficult for us to have complete control over because there are so many other variables at play outside of our control, things like site traffic, or it could be market volatility, competitors, how quickly actions get changed on the website, all of these things. So what we try and do is steer the conversation or steer the KPIs to be more useful and a better indicator of the program health. And that's metrics like number of experiments set live, the number of hypotheses that have been generated, so number of new ideas, I guess, the number of research outputs that we've completed, so the number of projects we've done around research, or it could even be the number of new designs that we've created. So these are usually better indicators of program health or experimentation health in a business rather than the conversion rate, because that's volatile and can be influenced by other factors. And so we'll stress test the conversation. I'll usually say, so these are the kinds of KPIs that we would recommend setting because they're a good way of understanding where there might be a problem in your program rather than just looking at conversion rate. And if we get good feedback from that and we get mostly positive signals, then that will usually be a green light for us proceeding and getting on board and doing more work. If there is pushback and there's an emphasis or a kind of, let's say, an insistence on us using conversion rate or revenue and hard targets set for that, then often I would say that's a bit of a red flag, and we might consider or think twice about going ahead with that, because it's a very risky position for us to be in, and it sets the wrong expectations for us, and obviously shows that we need to do a better job of educating about what is the right thing to be measuring, and often it also shows that there isn't a strong value on testing and learning and experimentation in that business if they're just focused on revenue rather than learnings as outcomes. So yeah, that would be my answer.
And does this affect in any way how you screen your prospects while you're onboarding them?
Yeah, so I would say if we explain that that's the way we typically measure the success of our programs using those kinds of KPIs, and we get bad feedback, or we get, let's say, disagreement around that, and we're not aligned on that, then that will usually mean that we don't proceed with going ahead with that kind of program, because it puts us in a really too risky a position. So it's usually a conversation, and it's not usually immediately a no, because I do think that it's partly on us to try and educate potential clients into our way of thinking, where we're trying to all optimize towards better, but agreeing on the right KPIs is often a matter of both being on the same page about understanding the value of experimentation and what you're actually trying to achieve with it. So yeah, it's not always a no, but it's usually a bit of a, let's say, an orange flag.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And while you were talking about the overall success metrics that you talk about, right, at least while you're educating the prospects or clients, of course, we all know that testing is more of a risk mitigation strategy, right, than a guaranteed way to improve conversions. Do you, and I'm sure, well, I'm sure you would, but what kind of steps uh, should be taken when a test doesn't yield favorable results? What is it that you talk about to your clients?
Yeah, so um, this is an interesting conversation, and I think there's I guess it depends on your definition of what winning is, right? So if we're just being measured on the number of tests that are winners, then we'll definitely, again, it goes back to making sure that we set realistic expectations. So we'll kind of usually give the guidance that a good win rate it's usually based on historic performance, but a good win rate might be somewhere between 20 and 30% in a program. So we usually set that expectation earlier, make sure that we're not setting the bar too high for us, that we're going to get lots of winning tests. But it's also trying to educate the client that a test doesn't always have to be a winner for it to be useful. And I talk about useful because I think utility is usually a better way of thinking about tests, rather than necessarily always just revenue or like winners and losers. Like, how useful is this result? And often we're always learning something. Even if we get let's say a loser or a test that doesn't win, then we still learn that the hypothesis is false. So that is still a learning. But we're also, there's not enough that's said about the kinds of tests which are done not to always get a winner, but just to make sure that it's not making the site any worse. The non-inferiority test, which is it's a kind of a horrible term, because it's such a it's super geeky, and you often lose clients when you start talking about non-inferiority tests. But essentially, it's the way of making sure that you're not making things worse by putting this test or this change live. So it's that is really true risk mitigation, because if we think that, say, a 30% win rate's good, then 70% of the changes to a website are either going to be flat or make the site performance metrics worse, right? So the idea of it just being something that at best or at worst, right, is not making things worse, then there's still a utility and there's still value in that. So it's about framing what the value of experimentation is properly, so that it takes in a wider compass of outcomes rather than just win-lose. That it's more of a grey area. And the other thing is, there's also sometimes too much of a focus on whether something has won or lost rather than trying to qualify the results. So A/B testing is brilliant for telling you which version won, but it will never tell you why it won or if there was a better version that you didn't test, especially if you're not doing any research to come up with the hypotheses. So if you're just randomly changing text or changing features on a page in a kind of haphazard manner without any kind of strategy behind it or research to back it up, you won't really know why it won or for what reason it won, right? So we will always try and advocate for doing qualitative research as well as doing A/B testing, so that we can better understand the reasons, the why, but also to make sure that every single one of the tests that we run has a strong hypothesis.
Makes sense. And when these businesses reach out to you, right, for CRO consultations, what do you see them skipping or not paying enough attention to what they should actually be addressing?
Yeah, it's very different depending on every company, but I'd say the most common problems or the most common blind spots, let's say, are thinking that they will get overnight results. So having unrealistic expectations of outcomes for something which takes time, especially if they are low maturity in their CRO or experimentation as a business. So getting from doing nothing to doing something takes quite a lot of effort, and it takes quite a lot of time, so quite a lot of patience, and also quite a lot of investment, right? You need to put your money where your mouth is. If you're willing and you want to start an experimentation program and get started with CRO, it needs executive buy-in, someone who is sitting in the board or in a senior position to sponsor it as a program. And that means putting budget behind it, right? You can't just do something. This isn't going to work if you just do it on a shoestring. So being serious about it and putting serious money behind it, and having the right expectations. But also, and this comes back to what I was saying earlier about making sure that you have properly aligned all of the relevant stakeholders who will have or should have an input on your experimentation when it comes to the website. So that could include marketing, sales, customer experience, and other agencies. If you're using external dev agencies or creative agencies, making sure that they have an input. The worst thing is when you get to a winning result or a really something you've been trying to prove, and then at the last minute, someone in the business who hasn't been consulted up to this point puts up their hand and says, "Excuse me, I wasn't told that this was happening, and I want to be involved at this point, which is very late into the journey." And then that can undo all of the good work you've done because they haven't had their voice heard. So making sure that all of the right people are there from the beginning is really important as well. And then the last one I'll just briefly mention is not having a strategy for how you're going to share or build that culture of experimentation internally once you get started. Experimentation programs can be really good, but if they happen in isolation and if they happen in an echo chamber in a small team, which are doing great things, but they are not sharing those results and they're not sharing the value of what they're doing with the rest of the business and giving everyone else an opportunity to become involved and become stakeholders in that program, the success of it, then it is not going to work. It's going to fail because it will happen in isolation, and it won't spread. And so you need to have a plan for how you're going to involve more people and also advocate for what you're doing internally. So having almost like an internal marketing strategy for how you're going to share your experimentation wins.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And based on your experience with the diverse clients that you've worked with, right? Which UK industries take experimentation most seriously, and which are the ones that should leverage it more for growth and innovation and haven't done that yet?
I think it's not very surprising, my answer to this one. I think in my experience, the industries that seem to be further ahead or taking CRO and experimentation most seriously are e-commerce. So in fashion, it doesn't have to be fashion, it could be anything. We actually have such a broad range of e-commerce brands that we work with. Travel is another big one, and so both of these industries that actually did very well and went through a big boom through 2020 and 2022 when we had the sort of pandemic, which forced a lot of businesses online. So that's not surprising. They often get a lot of traffic, and they often they can get very quick results from doing experimentation. But the industry which I think should leverage it more, which often gets very high traffic and could benefit a lot more from it, is the charity sector. So I think there are so many charities which get enormous amount of visitors to their website, and they have quite complex user journeys. Like donations aren't always as smooth as like checkout journeys, and there's subscriptions at play, and there's also huge emotional levers that you can use that will, if you connect properly with your target audience, can have huge impact. And I don't, in my limited experience, I haven't worked with lots of charities, but the few I have worked with seem to be behind on what can be done, and so I would love to see more charities making use of CRO and experimentation methodologies to get better results, especially when it's an industry which, obviously has a purpose to it and has a really good cause. So yeah.
Makes sense. Great points. Firstly, Joe, these points I feel like it's going to be really helpful for different different sort of businesses. People who are who have a slightly lower maturity level to the intermediate or the experts as well. I feel like everyone's learned something or the other from this conversation for sure. One thing that I am really interested in understanding is, you were talking about how you landed in the CRO industry and how everyone's journey has been so different. I've, in the younger age, we go through so much, right? I One thing that I really want to understand, and I love asking this question, is what is this what is the advice that you would give to your younger self
Oh
if
God.
you were to go back 10 years?
Oh, good question. So how young are we talking here? Are we talking still at school, or are we talking
I think let's talk about early 20s. I feel
early
like those
20s?
are
Yeah, okay.
really difficult years.
I think that I would say follow your nose, right? So follow your instincts and do more of what you find to be rewarding, and do less of what you find to not serving what you want. So I wouldn't say I would do anything differently, because I'm really happy with where my journey has allowed me to be. But I would say probably, I mean, obviously worry less about certain things which I don't think in retrospect are worth worrying about, especially around certain specifics around the world of employment. When you're in your early 20s, everything at work has high importance, and you worry so much about your reputation and things that aren't necessarily as important as they should be. So I would say, trust your gut, trust your instincts. When something ignites a passion in you in terms of like, this is really interesting, I really want to learn more about this, pursue that, and just keep your mind and your heart open to new experiences. If you are the kind of person that really enjoys learning, then you can, every opportunity with a business and every opportunity with a customer is a learning opportunity. You can learn so much about a brand from spending 5 minutes with a loyal customer. And so every opportunity you have with speaking to people in business is just take that as ask the questions which you think other people might say are stupid questions. Always ask the obvious questions, and don't feel embarrassed about asking them, because you learn so much more from those than you do about pretending to know everything. I still try and behave as if I don't know anything, and that I don't have 10 years worth of experience, because I think you can if you stay humble and try and act as if you don't know, then people will open up and give you their perspective on things, and I think that's a far more interesting way of living.
Yeah, yep, definitely. That's a great advice. Thank you so much for that. I have had a fantastic conversation, and I have personally had so many learnings from this conversation. It's time to switch gears a little and enter our surprise little round, which
Ooh.
we call the rapid fire round.
Okay.
This is where I would put some quick questions your way, and I'd love to hear your spontaneous responses.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Great. If you were starting a career in CRO today, what is the one thing that you would do differently?
I would probably spend more time learning I'd spend more time in maths. I'd want to be better at statistics. That's my weakness.
Interesting. I I would do that too. A newsletter that every CRO professional must follow.
Oh gosh. NN groups. So Nielsen Norman Group around UX.
Yes. Three books that you would recommend to your listeners.
Experimentation Works, Mismatched around usability and user testing, and the age-old classic Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah. What's your go-to travel destination in Europe?
Ooh. I'm going to say controversially here. The one that I've been to the most is Wales, and especially North Wales around Snowdonia. Some incredible hiking. But so that would be probably number one. But I'm going to throw in another one, which would be Italy. I just love Italy, and I think it's amazing.
I love it too. I have to go.
Yeah.
One thing that AI will replace in the next 3 years.
Oh gosh, that's a good one. What won't it? I think it will replace the idea of us being. It will start to connect some of these individual tasks, and it will actually start to be able to provide strategy. So I think it will start to take over some of the strategic element of what we do, especially pipeline management.
Okay. If not a CRO specialist, what other profession would you have chosen?
Either teacher or filmmaker.
Interesting. Very interesting to complete spectrums. One CRO metric that you wish people would stop obsessing over.
Email subscribe rate.
Okay,
Yeah.
makes sense. A dream or goal you want to achieve in the next 3 years. We're all about manifestation here.
Yeah, that's a good one. A dream or a goal I'd love to run a marathon.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Great. I think that's about it. Those were my rapid fire set of questions. Thank you so much for being so spontaneous. I've had a great discussion. I've learned so much, and I'm going to carry it with me, and I'm sure that's the case with our listeners as well. Thank you so much. Before we conclude, any parting thoughts?
No, just a huge thank you, Shilpa, for inviting me on. I've had I completely agree. It's been a really interesting discussion. Amazing questions, really great questions. They're all very thought-provoking and really gave me a lot to chew on. So I just hope that this has been interesting and useful for your listeners.